Okay, Meaty, over to you.
Thanks. Well, I'm checking in from the Southern California coastal bioregion, specifically Malibu Creek watershed. And we are drying out after a series of atmospheric rivers, which have caused quite a lot of local damage. It's quite a few years since I've seen the level of flash flooding and rock slides, mudslides in the region. The sun's out today, which is a delight. It's rare in California not to have seen the sun for days and days on end, but that's really affecting my mood. And I was just talking with my husband, and we found the same word at the same moment for our backyard, which is that it has become squirrel, bird, and rabbit kindergarten. It's springtime, even if it's still cold, and all the creatures are playing and fighting and scrapping and then playing like they're in kindergarten. And it's a delight. He counted 11 squirrels at one moment. There's a family of 3 rabbits, and the crows come and create consternation, but it's such a delight to have all this life in our backyard. I'm going to pass to Dan and say, how are you doing, Dan?
Great, that's a great intro. I can just see that. I'm in Santa Marta. I have fallen ill, some kind of head cold thing, I guess, or allergies, I'm not sure. But I'm really energized by this call and the previous call we just had on coming over there with Joe. So I'm in Santa Marta, which is on the north coast of Colombia. So I'm in Colombia, but I'm not in Barichara yet. I've got some things I got to do first here. It's going to take me about a month to get my down there and start work in earnest on the land. But anyway, I'm really happy to be here. Megan, do you want to take the baton?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm here in Vancouver in the Salish Sea bioregion. I was feeling great about this week until I found out I have to have a tooth extracted. And so I'm going to be leaving for that in a little bit under an hour. But it's raining as usual in our region. And I've noticed that people tend to use the word sunny quite differently at this time of year. If it's not actually pouring rain, people say, oh, it's nice and sunny out. When it's not, the sun is not going to be seen actually for a couple months. So I'll pass it to, I think, how about Rita?
Good morning, everyone. I'm in the Burn Fork watershed, Carbondale, Colorado, just over the hill from Paonia, where Elizabeth is from. We've had snow, and land is very, very white, feels very good, and just hope that more comes and we'll have an ease of the drought we've been experiencing for the past number of years. Trusting that that is so. So it's good to see everyone and excited about this session. And I'll pass over the hill to Elizabeth.
Hey there. I'm feeling good. I'm in Paonia, Colorado. Feeling really good about working with the mindset of watersheds. It's really moving ahead quite at an unbelievable pace. So I'm very excited about the plans we have to create more wetlands here with this beautiful snow that we've been having. So I'll pass it on to Preston.
Thank you. North shores of Lake Ontario, Toronto area. Excuse me, traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, as well as other nations. Very busy area for prehistory and history. Today, I'm a little rough. I had a bit of a bad night, but I decided I wanted to be in this call anyway. And the bioregion here, we're experiencing, I think this is another second or third day of rain above 0 temperatures. And I think at this point, I have to do some looking into it. But for January, I think we may have had more above 0 days than we've had below 0 days. And it doesn't seem to be a conversation with anybody, which I'm continue to be surprised about. Oh, the other thing was just got through looking at Joe and Penny's itinerary for through the Legacy project here in Toronto, and wow, daunting to try to figure out how to fit all of this stuff into that week. I'm hoping they're going to be able to get a little downtime in that hectic schedule. So I will pass off to Chad.
Okay, yeah, so I am actually just a little bit let's see, the other side of the border. So I guess consider I'm in the Great Lakes region here. I'm in so Anishinaabe lands in southeast Michigan, and not far from Lake Huron and Lake Erie, and I'm actually looking forward to making it out to Toronto, maybe even Cleveland now. So that's been added to the agenda. Yeah, it's been really, really cloudy here. I think I saw the sun twice in the last month. Yeah, and I might know a couple people who I can bring with me to some of these events. So trying to spread the word. All right, I'll pass it on to RJ.
Good morning or early afternoon. Yes, it's sunny here. Yesterday we were putting up a lot of birdhouses for preparing for spring. But gosh, it's too warm. We haven't had any snow in a while. Usually there's some snow on the ground this time. It's at least 5 to 10 degrees higher in January than it normally is. And I have a feeling this is a trend, and it's very concerning. And it's not that I like really, really cold weather. It's just concerned about that. Okay, I'll pass it on to Richard.
Hi, everyone. I'm in the UK, in the southern Chilterns bioregion on the River Thames watershed. It's been wet here, and now it has gone cold and icy, about -4 degrees. Yeah, and I'm coming in today feeling prosocial. There's kind of a lot happening in the UK. David Sloan Wilson, one of the co-founders of Prosocial, is coming to the UK end of January, and he's doing a tour around, and he's coming to my region as part of that, which would be really cool, and connecting some local people with Prosocial. And yeah, that's it from me, and I will pass on to Susan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm from the, I guess, just south of the Finger Lakes in the Susquehanna watershed at Binghamton University, the Evolutionary Studies program where David Sloan Wilson came from. And we are happy to be hosting Joe Brewer on February 6th at our weekly EVO seminar, and it'll be available on Zoom as well. So I'd be happy to share that if anyone wants to join in. We, like the rest of you, are having a miserable January. If it's going to be this damn cold, it ought to be pretty. White snow and blue sky, but we have the gray rain as well. So I'm feeling good about meeting you guys, because I just happened to come to the website and stumble on the events, and so and it looked interesting, so I'm tuned in, and hopefully my dog, which is waiting for WALK, won't be too disturbing. If she is, I'll mute and stop video. Okay, I'll pass on to let's see who haven't Evan. Have we talked to you, Evan?
Hello. No, I haven't talked yet. I'm Evan Hudson. I'm coming from the driftless bioregion next to the Mississippi in Iowa, in Dubuque, Iowa. And it has also been unseasonably warm and quite rainy. So rain is not a bad thing, but it's a little bit weird to be almost 50 degrees, you know, and it's a little nerve wracking. Hopefully, yeah, who knows, but I'm grateful to be here and looking forward to learning more about Prosocial. I'm kind of, today I am in a place, I'm in the groove. I have a bunch of these projects I'm working on and they seem to be proceeding nicely. So I'm grateful for that as well. I'll pass on to Megan.
I already went, but I will pass it to Claire.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I loved the call this morning, and things are kind of really. It just feels like are spinning and heating up in the Cowichan bioregion. We've got quite a big stone soup gathering happening on the 28th, so in 2 weeks. And just trying to kind of get those invitations, like some of the invitations have already gone out, but it's like, who else did we need to include in that? And there are these different streams that we're working on and learning at the same time. This is what I'm finding so exciting, is learning from the same time what's going on in the Basin region, what went on in Colorado, and how things were organized, because it just gives you, it's like these new pathways, like new synapses in your brain. They're sort of allowing you to go places you just hadn't been able to go before. And just so appreciating that. So anytime that I can kind of immerse myself in these conversations, I just feel like I'm learning so much. And even when the conversations feel like they didn't really make, that they kind of went sort of the same things, there's always new stuff. So just my total appreciation for, especially for you, Benji, for the holding the space, but everyone who comes. So I got here late, I'm sorry. Just trying to figure out who else needs.
We haven't heard from Anna or Kimberly. Is there anybody else that I'm forgetting? If so, please raise your hand. Kimberly, do you want to go next? I can pass it forward for you, Claire. Thank you, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm grateful to be here. This is the first Prosocial event I've been to. I'm on the southern shore of Lake Erie, originally attended to, cared for by the Erie Nation, and still called Erie Nation, you know, for different reasons. I used to introduce my, like, it'd be in a Zoom session and say with people from other places and be like, you know, I live in Ohio on Lake Erie, you know, the largest freshwater basin on the planet. Like, and now I'm in a place where that everyone knows this. So that's kind of fun for me. And Prosocial stuff, I feel like I know some of the essential characteristics of it, but I don't know anything about the community building. And because I'm very surprisingly helping to co-organize the Cleveland section of this trip coming up, which is a surprise. I'm home from work sick and have time. I can be here today. So thank you. And I'll pass it to Anna, who is part of the reason I'm here today. Before that, RJ. So thank you.
Yes, I'm very happy that you are so getting so involved, Kimberly. And I do apologize. I'm out working today, so I'm in my car, but I'm gonna be hopefully able to get on camera in a little bit. I am from Buffalo, New York, in Onondaga territory, or the Haudenosaunee territory on Lake Erie. Today, I'm actually in Rochester on Lake Ontario. I'm a Prosocial facilitator. I really strongly believe in this model. I think it's just a great framework to teach any group that wants to be more collaborative. I'm actually in the process of running a research project at the agency that I work for, seeing if it improves perceived supervisor support amongst workers. So I'm very excited to be diving into it more here as well. And then I'm also helping to plan for Joe's visit to Rochester. And Susan, if you wouldn't mind sending me information about his visit to the Finger Lakes, that'd be very helpful, because I'm kind of taking on some of the marketing, social media marketing for Genesee Valley, the Genesee Valley events. And we wanted to also include just some information about the Finger Lakes since we're so close. So that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. And Brian just joined us. Brian, do you mind just sharing where you are, your bioregion, and just a sentence or so on how you're feeling today?
January is a tough month for me, just in terms of self-care and kind of managing all of the pieces, and there have never been more pieces at kind of interrelating with each other. It's interesting to follow on Anna's comment. In part because I'm working with a core group, Prosocial Commons core group. David Sloan Wilson kind of being the most central, most notable figure in that group. So I had a meeting yesterday. We're just picking up as the second one in the new year, and of course, better connecting and collaborating with Prosocial is certainly a central component in our current discussion. That translates as logistics for me as a lifelong learner and consciousness practitioner. That means almost overwhelming logistics and complexity involving interpersonal relations and communication. So that's my check-in. I'm pretty well positioned and good for the work, self-care and interpersonal, family relations really being at the very center of that. So I'm good, Benji. Hope you are too. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Well, I can answer that right now because I think I'm the last to check in. Did we get everybody? I'm sorry, Chad, you checked in, right? Memory is lapsing me today. Glad you're here. So I'm doing pretty well. It seems like a lot of people got sick last night. Dan was saying that. I think there are a couple others. Preston, you said you might be, you had a rough night. I had a little bit of a rough night. I don't know, we're very far from each other, but it seems to be going around. But I'm feeling all right. And I'm in the Valley of the Sun right now, Phoenix, temporarily. And this is unseasonably cold and rainy. So I'm kind of on the other side of the trend from where a lot of you are, oddly. But I'll leave it at that. I'm really happy to be here with you guys today. We've got some experts, it sounds, in the evolution of cooperation and prosocial. So I'm just a little bit nervous, but I'll get through this. And we're going to just jump right into the story, actually. I want to sort of make this narrative based as much as we possibly can, because in just 2 weeks, Joe and Penny are going to be arriving in the Great Lakes Basin bioregions. Lots of really exciting conversations emerging. They're going to be going through Toronto. They're going to be going through Rochester, Ithaca. Is it Binghamton is where the university is? Binghamton. I'm glad I got that right. Cleveland, and who knows, they might make some stops in between. I might be forgetting something. This is just going to be a whirlwind of a trip. And so where do we fit into all of this? Because we're a part of the story too. We are a network of bioregions. Some of us are in those places and we'll see Joe and Penny. Others have already seen them in the case of Rita and Elizabeth in Paonia and Carbondale. And the rest of us are coming from other places. I know Megan and Claire are planning for their visit in the future. So how, as a network of bioregions, Can we have a space that's building energy and enthusiasm towards upcoming events, continuing to build coherence towards seeing the whole ecosystem, clarity for the story. And I think we have a really interesting opportunity to create a really welcoming space here as more people take part in these bioregional activation workshops, and Joe and Penny point people in our direction. And so that's going to be sort of our exploration today. Like, how can this space be really welcoming? How can people arrive and feel that, you know, we're all in this together? And so I open a lot of these workshops, these sessions, with a little bit of a ritual where I just share my intention for being here, for holding these spaces, in an attempt to continually invite a shared intention. I don't do it in a like a well-defined way. I don't have like a crystallizing statement. Maybe that will come down the road. I kind of just write something down ahead of time and wing it. And today it's a little bit on the poetic side, as far as poetic as I get anyway. So here goes. So we are the others. We are the others that we've been looking for. We choose. We see the death, the destruction, the dysfunction, the delusion, and we choose not to just let it be. We choose to adapt. We choose to do all of the things that are required to inspire each other, and we choose to transcend ourselves. We choose to be response-able. We choose to be speakers for our places and speakers for Earth, and we choose to act. And in my part of acting is to just hold this space playfully for now, where we can continue to come together as a network of bioregions, figure out how we can connect, how we can offer each other support, and increasing support as time goes on, more sophisticated supports as time goes on, and how we can experiment and explore parallel learning processes. Because I think we have a really interesting opportunity to come together and learn at the same time. And I think that can reveal nothing short of what I'd call planetary consciousness. As bioregional learning processes are emerging all over the planet, the better we integrate and weave those together, the more the planet, in some very real sense, is learning. So in order to unlock that, it's going to require a very high degree of collaboration, very effective collaboration. And that's what Prosocial is all about. It's about forming highly collaborative, effective groups. And here we are in this space as a group of groups. And so that's something to point out as well, and something to play with. And so today I want to just kind of open up a sort of social sandbox, a playful space. We don't have to take ourselves seriously, but I want to explicitly and with awareness think of this space as a place where we can practice being prosocial at the planetary scale. And so I'm going to go into just a few of the details of, or take a broad look at prosocial as a framework, before I introduce a conversational topic that I think can really orient us together. And I want to start with looking at prosocial with a lowercase p. Because, and I'm sure Susan can speak to this a lot more eloquently than I can, but prosocial is innate to being human. Like, collaborative groups have outcompeted competitive groups throughout our evolutionary history, and collaboration has been selected for. When we feel things like collaboration, when we feel things like empathy, altruism, these are traits in us. They're traits in our genes that make us prosocial. I think that we've often found ourselves in contexts where those are suppressed. How do we create spaces where we can actually lift those up and express those? And so I think that it's really important for us to understand that lowercase p prosocial is part of who we are, and uppercase p prosocial, the framework, is something that we can pull out of our back pocket and use as a diagnostics tool as something to guide our development as groups. But I want to create that distinction and that contrast between the two, because I think oftentimes when our groups aren't working well, we can really intuit a way through it in a very real way, in a very natural way. And so I want to just point that out as well. So to the uppercase P prosocial, to the framework, I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. I'm going to just break down the 3 domains of knowledge and say a couple things about the core design principles. So the framework of prosocial is broken into 3 knowledge domains. The first being how we manage common pooled resources. This is the work of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize winning economist, shocked the world, and still most people don't know who she is, but she did amazing and very, very important work. That's where we get the core design principles that were a distillation of her observations of how many groups manage common pooled resources. We'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. The second knowledge domain is contextual behavioral science, which is the study and the sets of tools that allow us to be managers of our own behavior change as individuals, as groups, as organizations. And then the third is the many libraries of study on the evolution of cooperation. And that's where we can see and understand deeply that this is innate to being human. And so to go back to the core design principles, I'm not going to share all 8 with you today because I know enough about how the human memory works. We won't remember all 8, but I'll share the first and I'll share the 8th because those are the ones that we're going to be playing with today. The first principle is understanding identity shared identity and understanding of purpose. That's how you know the boundaries of the group. That's how you know who's in and out, how you can act in service to the group. That's what forms the group in the first place. And then the 8th is appropriate behavior between groups. Like, how does a group of groups behave in a prosocial way? And so with that, hopefully that gives us some sense of the framework of prosocial and where that sits in relation to this more innate, this more natural lowercase p prosocial. And from here, I want to point out that we are coming together as a group of individuals largely. We are not a group of groups just yet. We are just getting started as landscape partnerships. We're just finding the others in our places who might be interested in forming a core team and forming a landscape partnership and exploring bioregional learning processes. So how do we explore at this planetary scale how to be prosocial? Well, I think that we can do so by exploring our connections to the earth and our origin stories for a love for the earth. So that's going to be the conversation that we jump into in breakout rooms here in a few moments, because I think that we have a very strongly shared identity and purpose at this scale, and we can sort of feel into that. We can lean into that as we hold space for prosocial groups, bioregional groups to form. And I hope that makes sense. And from there, I'd love to ask if there's any questions and comments. I see your hand, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to direct your attention, Benji, to what I just posted in the chat. It's kind of, in part, Stephen Hayes is going to be doing a seminar series presentation this Friday evening, 6 p.m. Eastern time, that he's gauging from what's posted on the internet, what This View of Life has posted. He's looking at the history really over the last 100 years, kind of in a post-Darwinian world. And the question that kind of arose for me is, in the last 100 years, kind of with what we've learned about evolution, why has it translated as it has into global society in a way that really puts at question the individual's happiness, health, and well-being, and kind of like maybe sacrificing that well-being in favor of institutions that don't even hold it, as an agenda item, but with respect to an organization's purpose. So I'm just throwing that out. It's recognizing it's too big of a question. It's not really intended to. And quite frankly, Benji, that was a really good presentation. I think as you were wrapping it up, I already had my hand up, and so kind of what you're saying, recognizing, acknowledging we are individuals, and we're not really at this point, we are interrelating with each other at some scale, but whether we have organizational connection, and that's really what Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles. Those are 8 guidelines in terms of overarching process. It's not the whole ball of wax, but very practical. I mean, from the standpoint of our conversations with each other, and how effectively, what comes to mind is Otto Scharmer's youth theory.
Brian?
Yeah, just let me get this one point in, and I'll finish up. Otto Scharmer recognizes that the outcome of the process is really a function of the quality of shared experience. And if we can kind of remain mindful of that and let go of our vantage points, our ego, and our personality in favor of a greater unified whole. Thanks.
Okay, I thank you, Brian. Okay, so I am going to actually model this sharing of my connection to land, my origin story for how I fell in love with the earth, and it's not going to be long. I practiced it a couple of times. It was pretty short, and then we'll jump into breakout rooms where we can share pretty intimately with. I think we're going to do breakout rooms of just 2 people, so that we can really get to know somebody and really be vulnerable. And then afterwards, I'll invite a couple people to share, and then we'll hopefully have time for one more conversational prompt to reflect more on how it felt to be prosocial with a big group around this orienting identity and purpose. So my origin story, I actually was incredibly privileged growing up, and I'm going to move inside because there is a landscaper right here. So I was incredibly privileged as a kid. I grew up in the Front Range of Colorado, and the property that I grew up on backed up to kids' paradise. It was like 100 or 200 acres, undeveloped. I never met the owner of this property, and I don't even remember ever having seen anybody else on this property. And so it was basically like 200 acres, or I don't know how big it was. It was enormous to a kid's, a young person's perspective. And it was just me and my brother roaming around. And, there were pine forests, Douglas fir, there were aspen trees in the basins where there was a high water table. There were meadows. There was an abandoned mica mine. There was an abandoned, very small settlement that used to support the mica mine. And there was an abandoned dump, which was like a museum of broken glass, like the sketchiest place you could ever imagine kids playing. But we somehow managed to get through our childhood without any big injuries coming out of the dump. And there were big rock outcroppings, huge views. I mean, really, truly paradise. And I don't even remember when it happened, but from a very young age, I think I, in a very natural way, developed like a conservation ethic. I loved that place. Every spring when the snow would melt and ponds would form, everything would get green and lush. I just remember this sense of just appreciating that abundance and flourishing so much and wanting that place to remain healthy. Beyond my own life, as much as like a young kid could have a concept of mortality, I remember thinking like, I want this place to remain healthy even beyond my time here. And I remember one day I was looking down the canyon and I saw a square cut out of the canopy, and somebody had just dropped some trees to put in a house. And I vaguely remember thinking that you know, no big deal how houses get built all the time, but it was a reflection, a period of reflection for me, a moment of reflection where I really thought about the lack of care for landscapes that I saw in others compared to the deep ethic that I was forming with this deep connection. I rarely heard people talking about it, talking about landscapes in the way that I felt about them. And it was like, I had this really sort of immature adolescent sort of phrase pop into my head, and I still remember it. I remember thinking to myself, whatever I do with my life, I'm going to spend my time getting nature's back. And so that stuck with me ever since. I mean, that was probably 25 years ago at this point in time, or longer ago than that, geez. But that's my origin story for how I fell in love with landscapes, and now wherever I go, I feel similar connections to landscapes that I did to that original landscape that was behind my house that I used to run around in all the time. And so with that, I want to open up breakout rooms. We've got 15 people. And so we can do, or we've got 16, Anna came back. So I'm going to just set up pairs, and how about we spend 15 minutes? Does that sound like enough time to do this? 15 minutes? Yeah. So we can really let it breathe and really explore it. And I want to encourage like mutual support and encouragement in this process. This is to some extent an exploratory process, and we're learning to be speakers for the earth as well through this, I want to point out. So with that, I'll set up. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you feel you got to know somebody else, one of the others, a lot better. Yeah, seen some thumbs up, and yep, great. And so now we've got 25 minutes left. I would love to hear if we've got some bold volunteers, a couple, maybe a few stories, origin stories of how you fell in love with place, the earth, even if it's just more generally, if you want to share a story of connection to the land. Do we have anybody? Claire.
Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from you too. Yeah, I just wanted to share one thing that did come up for us that that Chad was sharing was and Benji was narratives and storytelling, and how some sort of literature or media or storytelling had helped to shape our connection. And it wasn't like there was the stories that we shared, but that how powerful those stories were as well in helping to shape that connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Preston and then Dan.
Yeah, RJ and I, similar backgrounds originally, in that we both had a lot of farmland and rural area in our formative years. So there was the initial aspect, but the interesting part is RJ's relationship was really bonded at that point through that journey of his life to the land and to the organic processes, and then watching that change as it moved on later. Whereas mine, the Prosocial was about, as much as I was in a rural environment, I didn't really blend well with that community. I didn't have a great deal of connection, and it was always a push away. And so I didn't actually realize at that point in my life how important that part would actually be in the end. And it wasn't until I started in Toronto trying to decide what to plant in the property that I had, that I began to think, what is what are the plants to put down? And because at that point I had an evolutionary anthropology background, it became about, what is native to this area? What are the pollinators, etc. And then it was still that same difficult conversation with a lot of the neighbors. They're like, no, you got to plant the pretty flowers. You got to put these things here that we expect in this neighborhood, not the native species. So this, there's the journey that we're on and what we're supposed to be doing, and the disconnects on all the awkward conversations that we're going to have outside of these groups. And the Prosocial is going to be a welcome set of tools for that part of the journey.
Yeah, thank you for that, Preston. Dan, you wanted to share? And then I see Anna's hand.
I just was going to say that, Richard Coates told me a great story. He's from the UK, and he's now living as an adult not far from where he grew up as a child. And so he's able to, it's the connection is easy. Whereas I've had a very different background. And maybe that's why it makes it easier for me to leave a place like California to go to a place like Barichara. But yeah, just that, and then taking the opportunity with his love for the land, riding his bicycle up the mountain, that he's doing that with his children. His 12-year-old daughters loves to go with him, and I think that's really a powerful thing, because for me, the social connection is just so critical to our success and our ability. I just see them completely intertwined in how we're able to navigate the needs and to influence the right kind of things, as big or small as we can, from the social aspect. That it's just so critical. It's not just about what I want to do is go off and dig in the earth, and organize planting parties, but I know that there's some other things that have to happen, and that we can do so much more by using the right prosocial tools as we go, and influencing the right kind of interactions, and taking conflict as opportunity, because they're always going to have conflict. So I'm going to quit there. I see Anna's got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Mitty was in my group, and I think for us, what we both had was she lived in a very rural environment. I was in a semi-rural environment, so having connection with the land from a young age, and it really being almost like a refuge for us. For her, it was riding. She had a beautiful story about her pony and riding her pony through the countryside and how much that meant to her. And for me, I've moved around a little bit, and every place that I've gone, it's just always been the green spaces and spending time outdoors with friends that have been, and being in nature has always been like the most vivid memories for me, no matter where I've gone. So really, I think that just the social aspect of, Mitty was able to meet a lot of people while riding through the countryside. And I spent a lot of time there, both in our formative years. I think that really gave us really our connection when we were younger.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else want to share connections to landscapes? Rita.
It was lovely to find out that Kimberly, where she lives, has a small nature park just outside her backyard. So she has a lot of animals coming through, and she, even though she's in a very populated area, she has this little sanctuary that's right near her. That is definitely her connection to land. And we also found we have a very similar interest in David Boehm's work and his work in dialogue. So, which definitely I feel supports the prosocial way of having conversation and being in group. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rita. Susan, yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Hi. Well, Brian and I spent some time connecting about prosocial and our relationship with David Sloan Wilson. But what was interesting is that we were looking at the like the interface between prosocial and then politics and science and nature, and how well they fit together. And I started to tell him my story. It got to the end, but very much that sense of place that you guys talk about, the Susquehanna River. Even though I live in a small city, the river was just 2 blocks from home. I spent a lot of time there. And when I got a postcard from my uncle when I was a young lady, it was where the Susquehanna River empties into the Chesapeake Bay in Haverty Grace. And he said, send me a note in a bottle, because that's where he lived. And I was amazed. I said, oh my gosh, my river goes all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. I couldn't believe it. And so I ran to the library, because that's what you did then, and pored over the atlases and found out all about my river, and was so intrigued how nature could care less about our political boundaries. And so that was my first, piqued my interest in wanting to understand more about nature and science, and why I ended up studying geology. But then the last story I told him is right near the river is Lourdes Hospital, because we talked about religion as well, the intersection of that. And Our Lady of Lourdes had a beautiful little sanctuary out back, a stone garden with the Virgin Mother and a little girl praying, and views of the river. And it was so beautiful. I loved going there. It was so peaceful. And then they removed it and put Mary out front, and they literally, I thought this song was about it, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And it for me, it was heartbreaking, and it also made me realize you could lose these places as well. And so that's piqued my interest in protecting the environment, and so that's what I've been doing most of my life.
Thank you for that. Anybody else like to share before we move on? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I'm trying to do the yellow hand. Yeah, I was on the call with Evan, and it seems to be that, the family had played a big part in connecting Evan to nature. So his grandpa and his mum. And I think, I'm remembering how important that is. And we both had pivotal moments, so transformational moments. Evan had that at Standing Rock, where he connected with people who are very connected to the land. And even though his background is in politics, focusing on people, he's now focusing a lot on nature. And for me, my pivotal moment was when I was commissioned to do this art piece, just draw a tree and water. And I can normally, in normal situations, do that. And it was for a really important commission. It was inside a sanctuary, a conservative synagogue, in front of behind the ark, in front of the ark. And I tried 5 times to draw this picture. It was a big picture, and the trees were just dying in each picture. One was very dry, one was just diseased, another one was windswept, and another one just had one piece of fruit hanging from it. And it was through artwork that I realized something's up here. I'm connecting to nature in a whole different way. I can't draw it as it wants to be. And that's when I realized I'd got eco grief, and have been on this mission ever since to plant a food forest. So that was my story, and a very delightful conversation with Evan. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, Kimberly.
Yeah, what Elizabeth said at the beginning about family being outside, that refreshed for me that's what really struck me about speaking with Rita. And she shared how her dad was such a good teacher of the land, and how, the ecosystem, how everything works together. It's so simple. I mean, this is stuff we've known for so long, but that wasn't my childhood. I remember one time like being outside with my dad, for example. And I just think that's, we go through all of these high tech, how do we solve these problems? And just, I don't know, there was something about Rita just gently saying that she's had this connection since she was that young. Mine is much more recent. It would have been nice to have, young like that. And it's something easy that everyone can do if it's in our conscious awareness. So thank you, Rita.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. Is there anybody else that would like to share?
I'm really touched by what Kimberly said, because I think that's a really important piece she's named, that not everybody gets that chance as a youngster to have parental or adult mentoring, and just the opportunity to connect with land. So thank you so much for naming that, Kimberly.
Yeah, accessibility is such a big deal. I mean, forming nature connection is early nature connection, I think, is what enables so many of us here to become speakers for the land. I do want to share an experience that I've had after I took a PDC and really started to make a practice of observing, of going out and sitting in a particular space and not being hurried and just looking at the micro details of everything around me. I just cultivated this deep sense that there's just a universe of things happening in every little spot that you can focus in on, and that can be a connection to nature as well. I mean, I'm amazed when I garden, if I just look closely enough, I will learn something new. I will see something I've never seen before. And it is just, it just ignites my curiosity just thinking about it right now. Like I want to go just sit in the corner and see, and because I know I can go to this plant right here and see something I've never seen before if I just give it enough time. That's not a perfect solution to inaccessibility to nature, but it's a start anyway. Kimberly, is your hand up anew, or is that from before? Meaty?
You remind me, Benji, that during the depths of COVID, I took some online art classes, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do some nature's landscape art classes, and there are plenty of them online, because what you get taught is to really focus on the detail of what you're seeing. And for me, it was like whole new, although I'm naturally reflective and contemplative, and actually spent much of my childhood just sitting in places observing nature, there's a grain and a depth that if you take an art class and you get trained in, actually draw what you see, not what your brain is telling you. It's a beautiful unlearning process. I see Claire nodding vigorously, our artist.
RJ.
Yes, I just want to add a phrase that this all reminds me of that I learned 20-some years ago, 30-some years ago from a teacher, and I didn't understand it immediately. It is, we all are where we came from when. We all are where we came from when. And when I realized that we all come from such different backgrounds and we carry that with us, especially the landscape. What was the landscape for us? And then we can start to actually be prosocial if we're listening to everybody else's story, however they want to tell it and however briefly they tell it. Without that, we're kind of, reaching around in the dark to figure out where everything fits. And we're doing that here. And again, as has been said, many people don't have a nature experience early on, but they want it. And that's part of bringing that out. That's all. Very important, the phrase.
Yeah. Thank you, RJ. Really appreciate that. And for the remainder of our time together, I'm going to be honest, I don't exactly know how to phrase this inquiry. So maybe we can be a little bit improvisational, and maybe I'll invite you all to help me in coming up with the question. But I'm really curious because I feel this very strong potential in this idea of sharing our origin stories for how we fell in love with the earth to create a very strong identity and purpose at the planetary scale. I feel like that's something worth really leaning into and spending a lot of time in conversation. So where do we take this from here? Like, how do we really create that prosocial orientation by practicing being speakers for the earth? is there some other way that we can ask that question that orients us, that we can explore for the last 10 or 15 minutes? What are your thoughts on that overall? Claire, I see your hand.
You know, something that comes up immediately for me is I know that I had the good fortune of being sent to programs that were, they called them Outward Bound, where we would go into the mountains carrying everything, and basically just becoming familiar with how little we needed and how important that was for my own self-confidence, because it meant that I could go anywhere and felt comfortable that I was not, you know, that I had that level of confidence. So for my own kids, that's what I sought out, and have a real thing about supporting the programs like the Beavers Scouts, you know, those programs as well, that they may not be everything that I'm wanting, but they're giving so much for those kinds of experiences. So supporting that, but maybe sort of there needs to be another piece. Like I think the narrative piece is actually a really important one too. And I'm not quite sure how that fits together, but somehow celebrating that. And I do think that the arts have a lot to play in that. And I just want to bring that in as well, so that I think the arts become particularly powerful when there's different mediums being used to do those things. So like song and like parades, celebrations that somehow bring banners and like puppets and what have you, or and the visual arts, like when there's then they're not coordinated, but somehow they're reflecting different aspects in a celebratory way. And especially when it's done in a sort of community setting, it gives people this sense of common identity, because they're actually coming together around that. They're holding it. Somehow those pieces are helping to hold that up. And then finally, like the ritual, having like the solstice, the equinox, some sort of celebration marking of that. It's another way of collectively lifting it up, honoring it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And that sort of invites me, I suppose, to share that one of the upcoming sessions that I'd like to hold is a deeper exploration of community art, and how that is a way that we can be speakers for the lands, the earth, and it can also bring the community into, it can invite the community into shared identity, and we can explore it. It can be evolutionary. And we have you, Claire, who you've done so much of this, and Christine Palafax from Paonia has a history of this as well. And what kind of workshops or can we create that we can run in parallel in our bioregions and really come back and learn together? What will that do for inviting prosocial orientation and fusion of prosocial into our communities? So yeah, let's do that in the coming weeks. I don't know how it will fit in with all the Great Lakes stuff, but community art, I think, is one of our next steps. Yeah, Susan.
Thank you. So many thoughts came to mind. I love the art idea. I think that's excellent. And the storytelling, I think, is critical. Pardon me. One of the things I have a difficult time with is the people that won't come to these events, to solstice events, to riverbank cleanups, to Earth Day celebrations, to all these wonderful things that we put on. I think that it's critical. I think it's critical, especially families and children. And I keep thinking of that Rachel Carson quote about sense of wonder. And if there's anything we can do for a child is to keep that sense of wonder alive, you know. But so all that's critical. But I wonder if in the storytelling piece, if there's an opportunity to open up the hearts and minds of people that are less likely to participate in these events. You know, like almost like what's it called? StoryCorps, you know, on WSKG, but asking people, share your story of what little bit of green space or piece of nature that you loved, and then what might be missing now, and it might open up people to be aware of how precious, these places are, and perhaps even for the first time being aware of their grief, as I forgot who was describing their painting, that they might not even realize how valuable nature is to them. Anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, boy, that brings up a lot for me. Thank you, Susan. I see 3 hands. Really briefly though, because she brought in such an important with the grief and with people who are sort of outside of these conversations that may be on the edge. Is there anybody that would like to respond to that before we move on to Preston, Chad, and Kimberly? Claire.
I just wanted to say I've designed either community art projects, mostly community art projects, that are specific. It was just to reach a much broader range of people. And once they're drawn in, there's a sort of way of engaging in the conversation that those people are so important. And art does have a way of doing that. I really actually resist stuff that's very specific to a particular group of people. Arts need to be much broader. That's where a lot of the power comes from. I just wanted to put that plug in there, because I think you raise a really important point. And too often it does get very niched.
Good point.
Yeah, and we'll make space to explore that more deeply when we get deeper into community art, when we explore that theme. Yeah, thank you. Preston.
The thoughts that came to mind just prior to the art aspect, but I think art could actually be part of this process. As I did the transition and have the pollinators coming through, because the pollination plants put up a bird feeder, you begin getting the different birds arriving. There's apps that allow you to sort of track what's going on. And you have to begin thinking about, what do you feed these different animals? All these different little storylines and processes, particularly for the urban areas, I think is a great way to interweave things in such a way that families can get more involved, children can get more involved in watching urban. We tend to be at war, trying to prevent the raccoons and prevent the squirrels, but there's also this realization that they also have to survive this. So, let's be doing things that are complementary and sort of changing some of that narrative in a way that is conducive to regenerative concepts. I'll pass off.
Chad, over to you.
All right. Yeah, I'm just sitting here appreciating how deep the dislocation goes. So I've been looking into attachment theory, which begins with the creating of a sense of security and attunement between the parent and the child. And when that isn't actually achieved, then the child isn't able to self-regulate, and all sorts of imbalances result, right? So, yeah, so we're talking about the people just not having the experience in childhood to connect with nature. It goes much deeper. It's missing the connection with the great Ma, right? The Earth Mother. And I'd like to look more deeply into what we might learn from attachment, theory and healthy development when seen through that lens, in terms of the child being able to attune with Earth, and how deep then a lot of our resulting imbalances must really go. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kimberly.
Yeah, and I would just like to, bring in that there can be attunement with these other spheres, and still, I understand that dislocation, but there could still be really high quality people seeing wonder and the wonder, the extraordinary and the ordinary, yet not see it with Earth and what's right in front of us. I mean, so that's one reason why I really like the idea of the bioregional learning centers, because sometimes some things just need to be consciously put in front of people, because you can, I know a lot of people, they're not involved in these conversations and are feeling very connected, happy, doing what they're supposed to be doing lives, and not seeing what we can see. So just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important point. Yeah, just revealing blind spots, I mean, is such a big part of this. Just seeing the whole picture. So much of bioregional learning is this really is this feedback loop of seeing more and then responding to what you see and then continually remapping. There's so much that we're not seeing. Meaty.
Yes, I think I'm feeling in the flow of what you and Kimberly are just speaking to, and others before. I really loved my way into bioregionalism, which was that a friend shared with me a question sheet from Planet Drum. I love what you did this morning, Benji, because it actually sparked for me where was my way into nature. And I'm also aware that, as we're saying, that's not everybody's experience to fall in love with nature. And yet the conversations are important to be had with all of us. I live with a partner who was born and brought up on the streets of LA. He's an urban animal. He feels unsafe when he gets out in Joshua Tree, because this is not natural territory for him. And yet he is such a remarkable person in so many ways. He's a drummer and he has the rhythm of life in a way that actually I'm always a little bit ahead of the beat. He is in the beat and I recognize that in him. He has a heart as big as a house, actually as big as a mansion. And he's the kind of the center of neighborhood community activities just through being who he is. And this for me is also part of the story of place. But specifically my way into a kind of more bioregional perspective was through realizing I didn't know where my water came from. And then having the shock of discovering that it came from 440 miles away. I'm thinking, that's crazy. and that kind of led me on a journey. So I think very often the ways it's really useful to have neutral questions that don't assume anything about anybody's relationship with place, but gives them a chance to speak to whatever it is that is their relationship with place. Because I know that Mark loves LA in a way that can be really healthy for the regeneration of LA. And he's a city boy who grew up on pavements, So yeah, that's what thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Meaty. Well, it certainly leaves me with things to think about as we try to figure out how to discover shared identity and purpose at the planetary scale in this network of bioregions. Interesting inquiry. So with that, we've got 3 minutes left. Claire, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I would love to say that when people, I don't know if I'm trying to think what it's called, Parade of the Species, and I think it happens somewhere in Oregon. Does anyone know that one? But anyway, when there's a festival or there's some kind of a collective, like a community gathering, which is celebration, when that happens, it's actually very, very difficult to talk about this in a theoretical way, because there's kind of an aliveness that happens that it's actually not about the art. The art is just kind of like the catalyst that helps the other stuff to happen. And so I always find that it's very difficult to actually explain or talk about it, because it's all the other aliveness that's being woken up and it's the scaffolding that helps it to happen. I just wanted to put that in there. And it's so missing in Western societies, especially North American societies. Like it's so difficult to point to something that people have mostly never had experiences of, or not very rich experiences of. They may have had bits and pieces of it, but most people I find haven't had experiences of that. Deep ones anyway.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's sort of, so on Saturday, what we're going to do is we're going to invite folks from the Great Lakes Basin bioregion to bring an artifact, some sort of symbol that represents their relationship to the landscape. And so Susan, Kimberly, if you'd like, others, Preston already said he's going to. We're just, Claire, you bring up the importance of it being as grounded as possible for me. And I think an artifact artfully grounds us a little bit more. So I wanted to extend that invitation this same time on Saturday as a regular practice when new bioregions come in. And hopefully we can, over time, share the depth of meaning that arises with people in people when we go through this process together. And Rita, love to hear from you. And I think that'll about wrap us up.
Just very quickly, in May, we have a celebration here in Carbondale. It's called Dandelion Day. And dandelion is the town flower. And people are encouraged not to put anything on the dandelion that will prevent them from blooming to their utmost throughout May and into June. And part of Dandelion Day is a parade of the species, and the children dress up in costumes, and there's drummers and music, and down Main Street into Sopris Park here in the middle of town. So that's, I'm glad you mentioned the parade of species that happens here, and people are welcome to come. Dandelion Day in Carbondale.
All right. Well, that does it for our allotted amount of time. I want to thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate all of you as we try to figure out what we're doing here, how to cultivate space for everybody to come in and learn together. Appreciate playing in the sandbox. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye. And we'll
Bye,
see you
guys.
soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Nice
Bye-bye.
to meet you all. It's